Coming up on this week's show, it's Nintendo's biggest leak to date, but what's in GigaLeak?
MSN Messenger is back.
And we're joined by Joe from the amazing YouTube channel GameSack.
Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 235, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And welcome to this week's show. I can't believe it's actually our final show of July already. You know, I was thinking actually this time last year, I think we'd done about 6 retro shows and expos all around the world. We'd done Ireland, Ravi and I went to. We've been in Norway. Poland I've been out to as well, a couple in the UK. We're getting ready to go to Germany. This year, obviously, everything's kind of been on hold, but we're actually going to be doing one. And Ravi, I'm going to be seeing you for the first time in about 4 months next weekend.
Yeah, so usually we do international events, and I was looking at my calendar and it was kind of going, go to Norway today, go to here today. I was meant to go to San Francisco and all got cancelled. And I thought, you know what, let's start a small local kind of thing. And I think this is going to be the future, you know, small local gatherings and then kind of building up from there. So I've started a tiny local Amiga group for the Midlands region, and that's called the Robin Hood Amiga Group. The first meeting is sold out, I'm afraid, because we're basically limited to tickets because we want to keep it safe, have social distancing and everything. So we're limiting numbers to 15. But you should be able to book for the next meeting as well. And hopefully each meeting we can probably increase it by 5. And that's going to be on the second Saturday of every month. So that's robinhoodamiga.group.
The last show that we went to would have been Ireland when you and I went out there in January, so it's going to be cool.
I think people are going to be happy just to get together and have a cup of tea and not be with their family, and be able to talk about computers and just escape for a few hours.
Oh, my missus can't wait to have a break from me on a Saturday afternoon.
There you go.
So, hopefully that's going to expand. I mean, we've got people coming from Doncaster and Sheffield and Leeds and stuff as well. So
I wanted kind of small numbers on the first one because, I'm pretty nervous doing this and I've got all the PPE ready and stuff. And
Ravi's on it.
Yeah, I'm properly on it.
So, if you're doing to join us in the future, though, I'll link that up in our show notes. Now, of course, lots to talk about in this week's show. I'm hoping that Joe and I don't sound too sleepy on the interview that we're doing this week. So, usually, I'll be honest, Friday night, normally have a couple of beers, a couple of glasses of wine, with the missus, bit of dinner. Last Friday, none of that, because 11 p.m, I was on the Retro Buzz show on YouTube, and they're based in the East Coast of America. So we did that from 11 p.m. till 1 in the morning. I was on with those guys, chatting about all things retro, and shout to Glenn and the team. I know they're listeners to the Retro Hour, the big fans of the show. And that was a giggle. And then 1 o'clock in the morning, that finished. I went to get a strong coffee, and then Joe and I did an interview with Joe from GameSack at 2 a.m.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a late one. I really enjoyed it, and it was nice, kind of doing it at home and stuff like that and having that ability to do it. So I really enjoyed it, and I made the most of the night. I wasn't being interviewed by anybody or anything like that. I sat talking to Ravi most of the night over Messenger while I was drinking Iron Brew and watching the Mortal Kombat films to keep myself up. So it was still a retro night for me.
I owe you one, boys. That was an epic effort. But I did just see Joe sitting there eating sweets, and just sending me pictures of him surrounded by junk food.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, that was every 10-year-old's dream that night you had, Joe.
Yeah, it was a really good night. My missus went to bed, and I was just like, all right, this is it. I'm just slobbing now for I think I slobbed out for about 4 hours before we did it.
Now, because Joe from GameSack is based in Mountain Time. I don't think any of us had ever heard of Mountain Time before. Then we checked the time difference, and I'll be honest, it was worth waiting up for because, we've been big fans of GameSack. Pretty much since it started. It's actually 10 years it's been going next year. And obviously that channel's changed quite a lot. I'm sure if you listen to our show, you're familiar with GameSack. I'd say one of the highest production values of any YouTube channel that's dedicated to retro gaming. And their videos go so in-depth as well. I love the videos where, Joe, it used to be Dave as well. We'll talk into a bit more about why Dave's not on the show anymore in a bit. But obviously Joe's kept it going. But when they do reviews of systems, he'll generally sit down and do a 40 to 60 minute video covering all the highlights on any individual system. And the stuff in there stop motion animation. As you'll hear, these videos take a long time. A lot of effort goes into them.
Yeah, I found it really interesting just kind of finding out about like what goes on behind backstage and stuff like that. Because like you say, there's so much like production, and just so much effort gone into the videos. It doesn't just like they come out like I think it's every Sunday or every other Sunday. And there's a lot of effort going into these. So I just found it really fascinating just to kind of hear the story behind it, how he makes the videos and how he got started with Dave as well.
I love those versus ones that they do. So they have this system versus this, and they kind of play them off against each other. And it was quite a lot of when Dave was on there, it was quite a lot of Nintendo versus Sega kind of playing off against each other, which was really good fun.
We may have planted the seed for another versus episode for him.
And of course, being a Sega fanboy, you, Joe, our Joe Fox, you're in your element talking to Joe from GameSack.
Yeah, I was in my element, and I thought he was going to be a lot more, kind of like, yeah, Sega. But he was quite chill about it. He was like, yeah, Sega is my favorite. But it was cool to hear him talking about like Neo Geo and Nintendo and stuff, because he's a big fan of all kind of like game companies and stuff. And obviously on the channel, they probably just kind of big up the Sega a little bit more. But I thought that was really cool.
And there is some nice Dreamcast chat coming up as well. And also, Sega have kind of done that thing recently where they kind of seem to be looking back to the roots a little bit. So it was quite interesting to chat to Joe to find out what he thinks of that, being like a lifelong Sega fanboy. So that is coming up. Joe from GameSack on the Retro Hour podcast in around 20 minutes from now. Now, of course, lots of big stories to get through this week. I think maybe even the biggest retro gaming story of the year so far that happened just as we released last week's show. Now, there's two big releases on Friday and Saturday that has been nicknamed the Nintendo Giga Leak. Now, before we talk about this, I think it's important just to put a little disclaimer out there. Obviously, the way this was acquired, if you haven't heard about this, it was essentially a massive leak of Nintendo source code. And this was obtained illegally.
Yeah,
this was released on 4chan.
All this is Nintendo's basically proprietary software. So, what's been leaked has been property of Nintendo.
But I think it's interesting the split in the community actually around this. Some people have been like, as, a preservationist, the stuff that's in here, and as a Nintendo fan, it's fascinating stuff to look through, and things that we probably wouldn't have ever found out about before that's been behind closed doors for 25, 30 years. But some people are saying, look, it's stolen material. We shouldn't be downloading and looking through this kind of thing. But I think for a lot of Nintendo fans, the temptation has been a little bit too much to ignore it. So, we don't condone the way this has got out there, but being a group of guys who are really into this stuff, we need to talk about it, I think.
And I don't think you need to download it either, because there's so many articles and videos that are kind of already dissecting it and going through. So just check those ones out.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've not downloaded it or anything like that. And I'm really interested in it all. And there's some really cool stuff in there, especially for it's pretty much mainly Super Nintendo and N64, isn't it? But like Ravi said, I don't think you do have to download it, because there's so much out there already. You just need to Google it, just literally Google it. And there's hundreds of articles. People have made little GIFs out of it and stuff like that as well for the kind of the more interesting points.
Or you can just listen to us talk about it.
Well, yeah, there we go. Trying to sell myself short there.
Come on, Joe.
There are other news sources available.
Yeah. And that's enough on that subject. I'm joking.
There's no reading required when we tell you about it. Just sit back. Now, there was two big drops. The first one, this is on 4chan, obviously. And this was an anonymous source. The first one that's been nicknamed GigaLeak 1, that was on Friday. And then on Saturday, there was GigaLeak 2 that was mainly Nintendo 64 stuff. So, I've got a list here of kind of some of the highlights that we've seen from here. There are source code to a lot of first-party Nintendo games, including Star Fox 1 and 2, Mario Kart, Yoshi's Island, Link's Awakening, F-Zero, a bunch of prototypes in there as well. And also the source code to a lot of kind of Nintendo's emulation platforms are in here. But really interestingly, there's a lot of unused music and graphics in this archive too. And looking through it, they've actually got a really precise versioning system. So in a lot of these, you can kind of trace it from, the first day that they started working on a game to kind of the bits of the final build. So there's a real overview of kind of what changed during development of these classic games that I find really interesting. I mean, the big one that everyone's been talking about is the Super Mario 64 stuff. Now, originally that was nicknamed Ultra 64 Mario Brothers, and they found a few kind of unused enemies and unused weapons in the game as well. But the big story is that it turns out it looks like Luigi was actually meant to be in the game.
I find that super, super interesting because obviously most retro gamers know who are fans of Mario and N64 and stuff. Mario 64 know that there was always these huge rumors that Luigi was in the game and that Yoshi was in the game. It turned out Yoshi was in the game. Like if he did everything, he was on top of the castle or something. But everybody always went on about how Luigi was in the game. It was originally meant to be 2-player and stuff. And there was just like no evidence about it. There was always like these silly things like the little fountain in the gardens and the Boo fountain said like Luigi is alive and all this kind of stuff on it. But I think this is incredible, and I think a lot of people are going to be excited about this to find out that he was originally planned for the game. There is a model for him as well. Correct me if I'm wrong on the articles as well. And not only was he going to be in the game, it was going to be a full-on 2-player co-op game. That was the original plan, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's an interview with Miyamoto that kind of leads credence to that. I'll link that up as well. It's quite interesting. It was from a few years ago. They're talking about, he was talking about how, the original game was meant to be kind of a split screen.
Yeah.
So they went into the castle separately, then they met in the corridor, and it actually turned out that the hardware couldn't run it smoothly enough. So instead, they made it a one-player game only. But like you said then, the models and the source code, and actually there are audio files for his player movement in this leak as well. So, it looks like, Luigi was actually planned to be in the game as well. So, I mean, when you were a kid, it was always your little brother would play Luigi. Wouldn't you pass the controller over. So it would have been cool if it was a 2-player game, I think.
I don't think my brother would have let me play still.
And there was more stuff in here as well. I mean, Ocarina of Time, there was a lot of unused enemies in there. Majora's Mask, it turns out originally that was going to be 7 days long. There's like an unused mini archery game that they found in here too.
Yeah.
Mario Kart 64, some unused weapons. A feather was meant to be in there. Super Mario World on the SNES, a bunch of unused graphics and characters. And one thing that a lot of people have been kind of making their own kind of fan art about is the early sprite work of Yoshi, because he looks totally different to the final version.
He kind of reminds me of like a little like Disney dinosaur in the original version. And that's what I was saying about the GIFs of him. There's like quite a few. There's like 10 different designs of him. And it's like each design, he slowly becomes what we're familiar with, which I thought was really interesting. But it's cool to see that because didn't Miyamoto always want Yoshi in the games? He always wanted Mario to ride something. So it was cool to kind of see that development from like the early 90s.
Well, also, like, people are probably wondering where these came from, and they're part of like a series of leaks. So these leaks have come out before, but they haven't been as grand as this one. This one was the biggest, and they've come out of 4chan, that dodgy forum from back in the days. So, there might be more leaks in the future.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of talk about where this has come from, and there's a lot of people kind of, coming up with rumours and things. We don't know for sure, but like you said, I mean, it could indicate there is more out there. And I mean, some people have been saying it's only parts of, like, the games are in here, but actually someone over the weekend has built Dr. Mario. The complete source code has been built from this archive.
Oh, really?
So it looks like, maybe not all the games are complete, but there is quite a lot of stuff in here already. And, like you said, maybe more to come. Obviously, we don't condone where it's come from, but I think it is fascinating to look at this kind of thing, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. It's really interesting to see it. And like I said before, I don't think you need to download it, but it is fascinating.
Now let's move on to the Commodore 64. Here's a headline I never thought I'd read. Smoking meat with your C64.
Yeah, especially for you, because you're a veggie, aren't you?
I could smoke my veggie burgers.
Yeah, you could do halloumi.
Oh, I love halloumi. That's it, I can get my 64 out over the weekend.
What on earth is this? What is this, Ravi?
This is cool. Like, we've covered temperature readers already on the C64 and how you can check if your cup of tea is warm with a single one. Well, this guy's taken it to the next level, and he's called Deadline.
Okay.
And he's basically created a program called Smokador 64.
Lovely.
Which means you can hook up the connectors on like a smoker. So, ovens these days have different temperature readers all over the oven. And you could tell different parts of the oven. Well, basically, this creates a program that will receive these temperature readings and display them on your C64. And you can control it from there as well. So there's like temperature tuning in there. You can even toggle the light on the oven. It looks really interesting. It's just like a mad kind of device that's kind of been set up.
I mean, the other week we were talking about that Commodore 64 home automation system, and then you get something like this comes along as well. I think it just proves, it is such a versatile system, and I love that people are finding creative and wacky ways to keep using their Commodore 64s in 2020. Admittedly, this one is a little bit out there.
Yeah, and it's still pretty cool though. It's like just get a bit of BASIC, that's all you need, and just stick the temperature reader on the back. There you go.
There you go. It's barbecue season now, so perfect timing. Now, the PS4 is obviously a system that, you can play old games on it, but not straight away. You generally got to download them from the PlayStation Store. You can't just shove your old PS1 disc in there like you used to on the PS2 and PS3. But some enterprising hackers have actually managed to get a working PlayStation 1 emulator running on the PS4 thanks to help from the Medieval remake.
Yeah, so we had Andrew Barnabas on the show, who was part of Medieval as well. Fantastic game. The remake came out for the PlayStation 4, but it had the PlayStation 1 version within it. What's actually happened is there's a thing called Sony's bug bounty. So basically, people are given access to different firmware updates, and they're basically search for bugs and then get paid for that. Well, one of these got leaked, so it meant that people could put unsigned code on there. And what they actually did was they loaded up this Medieval remake, and they found that it had an internal PS1 emulator. That's how the PS1 version of Medieval was actually being played. So it looks like Sony might have developed this little internal player for the PS4. So they thought, we can add extra things in there. So let's try and get some other titles running. And this emulator, there's a lot of bugs with it. Some menus cause crashes, but they've got a compatibility list coming up now. And, they've got games like Carmageddon working on there, Abe's Odyssey, Nightmare Creatures. It's quite interesting to see all these different titles. And, I think as people play around and tweak the code, it's going to become more of an emulator. But you're also really limited because you've got to have this certain firmware on your PS4. I think it's 6.72.
The fact that obviously they just built a PlayStation emulator for the game, it's an easier way of doing it than actually building the game from scratch. It kind of makes sense. It just makes you wonder why Sony don't just have like a PlayStation emulator on there anyway. I guess they want to sell you the games again. That's why, isn't it? But
yeah, like you'd think, they used to have backwards compatibility on a lot of the old hardware, and that was really good actually. It would run games really nicely, and this also displays in the PS4 native modes, so it will be displaying in 1080 and stuff, which is kind of like the emulators doing a little bit of upscaling as well.
As Jeff Goldblum would say, hackers will find a way. Now here's a sound that might take you back to your teenage years. Does it sound familiar?
I think I've just been nudged, guys. I just need to go.
Do you remember that when your screen would wobble all over on MSN Messenger? I used to troll my brother with that, just keep hitting it over and over and over again. Well, obviously, MSN Messenger, it defined a generation. I mean, these days we all use stuff like Facebook and WhatsApp and that kind of thing. But MSN was the daddy of instant messenger services, particularly over here. I know AIM was very big. America Online was big over in America. I didn't really use that much. I don't know about you guys. I was always either MSN or Yahoo Messenger back then.
I was ICQ and then straight to MSN, and like MSN for a good 5 years.
Well, it was like, the ultimate instant messaging tool back in the day. Obviously, in the last decade or so, wasn't it? Microsoft closed it down and migrated the servers over to Skype. So essentially, MSN didn't work anymore. The servers were redirected. But now it turns out, if you're kind of missing MSN and those sound effects and nudging your friends, there is a way to reactivate those old versions of MSN Messenger and get them working again. Now, this is thanks to a piece of software called Escargot. And this essentially redirects it and emulates the older MSN Messenger server architecture. So essentially, you can change your servers and get the tools up and running again.
That's mental, because I remember there were like phases of MSN. So I'll do a bit of MSN history now. But I remember there was it started off with a link to kind of IRC and stuff with ASCII text. Do you remember everyone used to have those ridiculously fancy MSN names with lines going all over it? Yeah.
Tildes and carrots and...
yeah. And then later on, it went to the voice samples. I don't know if you remember that, where people could scream down the mic. They could record a voice sample. Dan, wake up now, and just send it, and that will play straight on your PC. And then people would drop music samples in. So if you did something, it would be like "Pretty Fly for a White Guy" or like some 90s kind of rock tune or something.
A little bit of trivia for you here. That's actually how I met my wife.
On MSN.
On MSN.
Yeah, she was a friend of a friend, and he just added us into a group, and we started just sharing metal music because we were like 16. And then from there, we actually met up.
Well, Joe, for your next date night, you can get this working again. You
Exactly.
sit down, your laptop.
I'm going to get it working tonight. It'll just be a little bit of nostalgia there.
You like, remember me?
What was the name on there? Was it like Butterfly Charlie with loads of little emojis and all that?
You know what it was? It was like it was literally something really similar to that. But I was at that stage where I'd become mature and just changed mine back to Joe. Just Joe. Like, got rid of all the stuff Ravi was just on about.
That's probably why you stood out to her.
Yeah.
Who's this mature guy?
Oh yes, Joe.
Yeah, well then obviously we went a bit later on. It turned into Windows Live Messenger by the end, didn't it?
Yeah, it got crazy when the big emojis and all the smiley animations came in. That's when it got a bit rubbish. But for a few years, it was absolutely mental. I remember going around my friend's house and I just heard his PC in the room just going, and there was like all this music coming from it and everything. I was like, what's going on? And he goes, oh, just some idiot messaging me.
So a lot of it didn't have like flood protection or anything, did it? You could just send stuff over and over and over again.
Yeah, and the groups as well. You could get people into groups, drag them in, and they were like, what are you doing? And then suddenly you've got 20 people going mad.
So what he's done, I mean, this bit of software here, it patches the old versions. So you can use from MSN version 1.0 up to Windows Live Messenger 8. So essentially, all these different, you download this little patch here, it redirects it to the new servers. The downside of it is, this is the caveat, if you want to communicate with someone else in MSN, they also need to download this patch version of it as well. So just by patching your version doesn't mean it's going to instantly open it all up again to all your friends and everything. So that's kind of the downside, but it does mean that the software is usable if you've got a friend who's crazy or maybe sad enough to actually do this with you as well. Interestingly, though, if you go on the website here, they've got a Discord server and an IRC server. No Messenger group. Come on, guys.
The irony.
Do you think I'll be able to make a MSM to Discord bridge? That would be interesting.
If anyone can, Ravi, you can. I think, though, lads, for next week's show, though, we should all download this and plan the show on MSN again for old time's sake.
That sounds like a good idea. You just hear all the nudges and everything going across. Ravi sending us some music constantly.
Yeah, maybe not such a good idea.
Peter Andre.
Yes.
Right then, before we get into our chat with Joe from GameSack, a little interesting video. I haven't had a chance to watch this yet, but I know, Ravi, you sent me a link to this saying it was really cool. This is our good friend Perry Fractic, Retro Recipes, Christian Simpson. He is like the guy when it comes to making really out there wacky kind of stuff. He's actually linked up a proper floppy drive to one of the new Commodore 64s.
Yeah, so for ages people were trying to work out how to run the floppy drive on the new C64, and they were all trying to format these external floppy drives, these little USB ones.
Yeah.
And it turned out that it was actually the Mac format, so you needed to put it into a Mac, format the floppy drive that way, and it would read, and you would be able to load it like about 6 games off it, and you can read them on the C64 Mini. Now, of course, Perry Fractrick loves to take it to the next level. So he got a 3D printed design of the 1541 floppy drive and basically shrank it down and did it so he could fit this external drive inside and totally themed it. So it is exact kind of proportions. And it looks fantastic sitting next to the original, sitting next to the mini case. It looks really nice.
I mean, people might be like, what's the point? Why don't you just put an SD card in or something like that? But I think there is something to be said about having, the experience of using floppy disks, even though this is a 3.5-inch drive and not many people use those on the 64s back in the day, did they?
No, it would have been harder to do the bigger drives, but, it just gives that nice aesthetic, and that's how people had it set up. I think it'd be great to have a dot matrix printer on there or something.
No, actually, I was looking for ribbons over the weekend for my dot matrix. I thought, I'm going to have a go on that. Yeah, get that set up. I've got one in the garage. Except the ribbons on them, you can kind of re-ink them, can't you? Just spray them or something, I think.
Yeah. I think they're still efficient. A lot of banks still use them, don't they?
Yeah, I don't know if I told the story on the show before, but I remember we were going for to get a mortgage, and I needed like a year's worth of bank statements. And then I heard the teller at the bank started to print something out in a dot matrix, and I'm like, "You're not doing the whole thing on that, are you?" She's like, "No, it's just your receipt. Don't worry." That would have taken a while. So if you're doing to check out the video that Christine did, I'll put a link to that and everything else we talked about in our show notes at theretrohour.com. And of course, on our website, theretrohour.com, that is where you can help the future of this podcast. Now, we do have a Patreon running at the moment, and we set this up, start of the year. Really, the idea behind the Patreon is that, thanks to you guys' support, we can keep this show going. It's going to pay for equipment, spaces to do the show in, and essentially just mean that we've got a future of this podcast because we're doing the show remotely at the moment. I'm in the studio that we always traditionally use, but again, it's not a studio that we own. So really, having our own stuff is just going to make this a lot easier. So thank you so much for your donations so far. And of course, for helping out the show, 100% of what you donate goes back into the running of it, and you will get a mention on a future episode in the Hall of Fame. Just like this week, thank you so much to Edward Fitzpatrick,
Fabrice Deville,
Falco Loeffler,
Graham Sinclair,
and Jake Worrell,
who all made donations into the running of the show. And if you'd like to help out, I was looking at the tiers we did the other day. The lowest one is like $4 a month. That's like, $1 a week for the show. And you get it ad-free. Sometimes you get it early. And of course, you'll be helping us out as well. So if you can help, that would be massively appreciated. And you'll find it at theretrohour.com. Right now, let's get into this amazing chat that we did with one of our favourite YouTubers. Joe from GameSack is next on the Retro Hour podcast. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it's time to welcome on this week's very special guest. And we are so thrilled to be joined by our guest this week. Joe and I have been such big fans of this YouTube channel for coming up on 10 years now. Let's welcome Joe from the amazing GameSack. Hello.
Hello. How's it going?
Very good, thank you. Now, we really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us this week. Like I mentioned then, GameSack is coming up on its 10th anniversary next year, is that right?
That's right. Coming in April, I believe. Yeah.
Did you ever envision that when you started the channel, you'd still be doing it a decade later?
No, actually, I didn't even have any idea it would go anywhere near this long. So I'm kind of pleasantly surprised, to say the least.
Well, obviously, we're going to get a bit more into the kind of content that you do on your channel. I'm sure everyone listening to our show has watched GameSack before. But let's kind of get a little bit of background on you. What kind of started your gaming journey then? Where did your first gaming experience happen, and where did it all start for you?
Well, first gaming experience would be hard to say, but I really like, playing games in the arcade, like in the supermarkets back in the day and in local arcades. And then, the Atari came out, but I never personally had one. But I would play it at friends. But my own the first video game console that I personally owned that I could call my own was the Sega Master System. And that just spoke to me because I liked a lot of Sega's games in the arcade. So I had to get the Master System, and I just loved it. And I've been going since then.
What was the gaming scene like where you grew up?
Just for America, it was basically standard. There was arcade games scattered in supermarkets, a few of them. Most supermarkets might have 3 at the most. And then there was, dedicated arcades, like in the malls and whatnot, that I'd love to go to, but I could only go to on the weekends, like when my parents would take me and give me $5 and I could just buy a bunch of tokens and whatnot. And that was just wonderful. But, in the supermarkets, my mom would give me like a few quarters where I would play like Cuber or Kangaroo or Miss Pac-Man while she did the grocery shopping. That would keep me entertained. And those are some good memories. That's why I love those 3 games, I guess.
It's interesting where arcade machines popped up. Over here, I always remember seeing arcades in like video rental stores. There'd always be like 1 or 2 in there, and leisure centres. When we went swimming, we'd always come out and there was like a golden axe cabinet, and we'd always have like an hour on that after. It was really random, really.
Yeah, that is pretty random. They pop up in places like that here too, like 7-Elevens, which is a convenience store, and places like that. They'd be like almost everywhere. Places would always have like 1 or 2 machines to make a little bit of extra money, I guess.
So what was the first system you got at home then yourself?
The Sega Master System.
Yeah, I was going to say, that wasn't that successful in America compared to over here.
No, it was not. And, it didn't really bother me because, like I said, I preferred Sega's games in the arcades. I really liked what they were doing there. And they had a lot of the same games on the Master System. And I was like, yeah, I've got to get that. And So I didn't care. I mean, Nintendo, yeah, that was cool. I would have loved to have that too at the time. I was envious of a lot of its games, but I had to start out with Sega anyway.
What were the standout games for you for the Master System and also in the arcade for Sega?
The games that made me choose the Sega Master System were Space Harrier specifically and Outrun.
And I always loved Sega arcades as well. I mean, they seemed like they were really innovative back then. Do you remember stuff like the Sega R360?
Right. I never got to play that in real life. I've seen one, but it was down for repairs, sadly, so I never got to play it.
I remember seeing that one, and then there was a hologram game called Time Traveler that I remember seeing around the same time as well.
Right, I've seen that, and I never played it. I just looked at other people playing it. I was like, yeah, I'll pass. It's fine just to watch.
Again, but it really felt like Sega were like, pushing the envelope and just trying different things in that era, which I did like.
Yeah, I like that too. They always seem to be on the technological cutting edge.
And obviously, having the Master System, I guess a lot of kids at your school probably had the NES. I mean, was there much rivalry in that regard?
There was a little. My friend had an NES. Well, two of my friends had an NES, and I went and got a Sega Master System that Christmas. And so I made one of my friends a videotape of me, playing some of the Sega games. And he brought the videotape back the next day, and he said, "Oh man, the graphics in the Space Harrier are awesome." Then a couple of weeks later, maybe his parents bought him a Sega Master System. So at least I had someone else to share some Sega games with.
Was there much kind of like media around in your youth? Was there many magazines, any like big TV shows or anything where you grew up?
Mainly just video game magazines, and I loved those. Every time one would come out, I'd just read it cover to cover, and it was immensely entertaining to read for me back then. For TV shows, eventually they came out with something called Video Power, and then there was Game Pro TV, and then there was a few other things like Nick Arcade, but I didn't have cable, so I didn't see it at the time. So mainly I'd watch Video Power and Game Pro, which were okay TV shows.
Well, I heard that you worked in a cinema. I mean, did that get you into films and film work?
Yeah, I mean, I was a projectionist for a very, very long time, and I loved, doing everything technical, and we'd have to put the movies together and take them apart when they're done. And that was always very fun to me, and just trying to keep everything as clean and as pristine as possible, because a lot of theaters would just let their prints get very, very, very dirty and scratched and stuff. And we kind of took pride in keeping them clean and unscratched. I don't know. I just like the creative arts, if you want to call it arts, stuff like that. And I've always been into video editing ever since I had a camcorder, which I got probably in like within a year, less than a year after I graduated high school.
And how were you editing then? Was it like video to video machines and
Exactly. Well, at first I would just edit in camera as I shot. It's like, okay, that seems bad. Rewind the camera and then just shoot it again. And then just record it straight onto a VHS machine. And then eventually I was like editing from the camera to the VHS machine and back, and doing a little bit more fancy stuff.
Now, do you look at that though and think how spoiled we are today with, digital video editing suites, how long it used to take?
Right. I mean, once I got into nonlinear editing, is like my world was changed. I just loved everything about it. It's just like, it's hard to describe, but I could just feel the man, I don't even know what words to say, but it was just amazing. Just the growth in the industry at the time. It was just amazing to experience, and I loved it.
About now, like we said earlier on, about 10 years ago, you started GameSack. And am I right in thinking that you and Dave started it together? How did you and Dave meet? Because I'm a big fan of GameSack, and obviously you have a few kind of like home video kind of footage of you guys playing Sega and stuff back in the day. How did that all kind of come about?
Well, we met in high school freshman year. So yeah, and like I said earlier, I got my first camera not long after high school. So we'd mess around with that and making stupid videos, very, very similar to what you see in our end skits. And we just liked doing that. And we did that for years and years and years. Once, YouTube rolled around, that was there for a couple of years, few years, however long it was. And we decided, hey, maybe we could do a video game show or something. because other people were doing it and they were getting good views. And it's like, hey, maybe we could, we think we're entertaining. So we decided to do it. And we thought of the name of the show on the day we shot the first episode. And we didn't know exactly what we wanted with the show, just talk about video games in our own style, I guess. And then we just kept doing them week after week, and it grew.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I was going to say, the next question we've got is, where did you come up with the name Game Sack and the idea what's in the sack?
Yeah, well, we kind of wanted to be slightly vulgar because that's our humor, and at the same time, the other one that we were throwing around, and I'm so glad we didn't choose this, was Game Scrotum.
It's not got the same ring to it, has it?
Yeah. So
memorable.
Right. But so is Game Sack. I mean, maybe not quite as memorable, but at least people will like kind of get a connotation. But at the same time, we could also say, hey, we're pulling games out of the Game Sack. So it kind of has a double meaning. And you don't have to be as explicitly vulgar. If we had called it Game Scrotum, there would be no way the show would have taken off, because the YouTube landscape really changed since back then, when everything was just vulgar.
Well, what kind of channels inspired you originally then? Who were you watching before you started?
I watched a lot of AVGN. I mean, he didn't really, his style didn't really have any influence on what we did. We just kind of wanted to do our thing. But as far as video games go, that was pretty much all I watched. I'd watch the occasional other person's video. They didn't have like huge channels or anything, but someone would upload a video about their favorite game and talking about it, and then I see they get like 5,000 views. I'm like, hey, man, maybe we can do that.
I was going to say, a lot of people seem to start with AVGN just because he was so huge, but it's
Right.
always that like nice breath of fresh air to not see like people like just trying to copy it, and that's
Right.
one of the things I really do like about GameSack. I mean, I only came across you guys a couple of years ago, but it's it's fresh. You're not shouting at the games or anything like that. And I also love your collection. Is there any sort of like holy grail games or anything like that, or any cool stories behind any holy grail games that you may have got a hold of?
Probably my biggest holy grail, so to speak, would be Neo Turf Masters on the Neo Geo, which is a very, very, very expensive game for whatever reason. I don't know. I was able to get that for $200 back in the day, and which is still a lot of money, but for a Neo Geo game, it was about average at the time. I mean, I've had it for probably 15 years, maybe a little more. I didn't even know that game existed for the longest time, because I had played it on the Neo Geo Pocket Color. I'd owned it on that, and I loved the game on that. And it's like, it wasn't until years and years later I learned there was a Neo Geo proper version of it, and I played it, I think, on an emulator. Like, wow, this is amazing. And then, I saw that come up for sale, and I snatched it. And it's just like, man, it's a golf game. It shouldn't be this fun, but it is.
With Neo Geo, like, I don't know about with you, but in the UK, it's really, really, hard to get a hold of console, hard to get a hold of hardware. And you guys, you do some brilliant Neo Geo episodes. How did that kind of come about? How did you start your collection with Neo Geo? How did you find out about it?
Well, back in the day, they advertised, or they did advertise in video game magazines, but there was articles about it beforehand saying, hey, this Neo Geo system is coming out. It's the same exact games in the arcade, but it's going to be rental only. So once it finally was available to rent, I did end up renting the system and a couple of games on two different occasions. And I was like, this is awesome. I'd love to own it. And then it finally went on sale, and the system was like $500 or $600 or something like that. And the games are $200 to $250 a piece. It's like, okay, well, that's just not going to happen. And then later on in life, I, became employed and started saving up money. And this was well after, the whole eBay thing started coming around, and prices started going down amazingly. So I bought a used Neo Geo from somewhere on eBay, I believe. And, I can't remember how much it cost, but I want to say around 200 or so, which was pretty good. I don't know how much they cost these days. And then the games, I bought a bunch of games, and like, there's only a few games that I spent more than $100 on.
Oh, wow.
And so I was like, woohoo. And nowadays those games like Magician Lord, which is a really good game for what it is, an early game. I bought that like almost brand new. And it was like $35 when I bought it. And that thing's like going for like over $100 at least now, I think.
You know, to me, the Neo Geo, I remember kids at school talking about it. And it was kind of one of those systems that, you know, everybody knew someone who's like, you know, far removed cousin had a Neo Geo who never came to town. I didn't believe it existed for years. It was like,
Right.
it was like a rich kid system.
Right. It definitely was.
I got into it recently though, because I got the Neo Geo CD, which I watched your video on that, and that kind of did seem like, even though the loading times are slow, it kind of felt like it was an easy way to get into Neo Geo.
It really is. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the Neo Geo CD. And honestly, the loading times, at least on the system I played, it didn't seem that bad.
Well, your videos are obviously highly polished, and I always love the stop motion animation that you do in there as well.
Awesome,
What's kind of the back? How did that kind of come about then? And is that something you've done for years then? And why
Yeah.
did you include that in the videos?
Yeah, I've been doing animation for as long as I've been able to, since I've got my first camera. In fact, I have a little. I don't know if you guys had Silly Putty over there, but it's kind of like I did little animations with that. Like the same week, I got my camera just because I could. And I've always been fascinated with animation and animating things. I wanted to be an animator for the longest time. So it's just kind of a very me thing to do, I guess. Just, I like to be creative. I like to do stuff like that if I can.
Tell us a bit about the process and how do you kind of go about doing that with modern technology?
With modern technology, it's a little bit easier because, well, I use a DSLR camera to take individual still pictures of everything. And back then I just use a video camera and just press, record, stop really, really fast or whatever. And then, but with the digital still camera, I can just, throw them on the computer, and I can, decide how fast I want them to play and stuff like that. So there's a lot more control. And back then though, it was like really complex because I had the Super VHS VCR, and I had to do this special trick with rewinding it and pressing buttons at the same time. Or I can't really remember exactly how I did it, but it was complex because if I didn't do it a certain way, then the next frame would either overwrite the one before or would come too late, and it was just a mess. But nowadays it's a lot easier with the tools we have.
What capture devices do you use? And is there any certain, any consoles you have difficulties with capturing for?
Yeah, I have both an Elgato HD60 non-S, which means it has the H.264 encoder built into it. And I also have an Elgato 4K 60S Plus, which is their brand new standalone thing, which, you don't even need a computer. You can just record it straight to an SD card. And it's pretty amazing. The only thing is with the 4K 60S Plus, it doesn't like Super Nintendo or NES, because those two systems run at a slightly higher, and we're talking very slightly, it's like the NTSC standard is 59.94 hertz instead of an even 60. I mean, that's a whole nother discussion.
I didn't know that.
But the NES and the SNES run at like 60.03 hertz. So they're a little faster. So I can record to the 4K 60S Plus, but then the sound gets out of sync. So I have to record those with the Elgato HD60, which for whatever reason doesn't have that problem. Which is too bad too, because the 4K 60S Plus makes much higher quality recordings.
I really thought you were going to say some really obscure game console that I'd never heard of or something would be the most difficult to record for.
Well, you're not far off, because there's a lot of arcade PCBs that I have, and they run at all wackadoodle refresh rates. And they can go down as low as 57 hertz. And it's like, how do you even record that? And those are probably the toughest, but I don't have to do those very often. And there's been a few, like when I had the, what is that? The Amiga CD32. That was the PAL version that I had. So I was running at 50 hertz. And it's like, I can capture it that, but it's kind of odd. And, I had a monitor that accepts PAL too, but it was just kind of odd. and I had to edit it all in a 60 frames per second format, I believe. I can't remember exactly what I did, but I think there was something a little weird. And another time, there was like an N64 game, like Tasmania.
Oh
And
yeah.
I think, and it was like unreleased, and but only in the PAL region. The PAL region was, or wait, no. It was released, but only in the PAL region.
Right.
And so I had to record that, but I'm playing it on my Nintendo 64 and it's coming across in black and white. And so I had to modify my console for RGB, and then it recorded just fine, 50 frames per second in color. And that's how I had to do that one.
That is commitment.
Yeah.
You mentioned the CD32 episode you did, and to me that is one of my highlights of all the videos that you've done. I really enjoyed that episode because I had an Amiga as a kid, and I've got a couple of CD32s here as well, and I enjoyed the fact that you guys came into the system with kind of fresh eyes, and I thought that was quite an interesting journey to watch.
That's good. I mean, I've always thought the system was interesting. That and there's another one you guys had. The name escapes me now. It might be the Amstrad.
Yeah.
They were that. Did the Konix ever come out over there?
It never did. No, the Amstrad was a GX4000. Yeah, that got released in 1990. The Konix, that was just it was a vaporware essentially. Never got released though.
Yeah, because those two were the ones that always fascinated me, that I never really heard much about after an initial blurb in the U.S. magazines.
Yeah, because I think the crew behind the Konix actually went on to work on the Jaguar, if I remember correctly.
Really?
It was the same team, yeah. So, there's a lot of interesting kind of lineage there. But actually, speaking of the Jaguar as well, I mean, I always I'm a bit weird in some respects, that I actually enjoy exploring kind of failed systems, just because it feels like, they're kind of an untapped kind of resource. I mean, do you have any guilty pleasures?
Oh, sure. I mean, like the TurboGrafx 16, which was wildly popular in Japan, but here not so much. And yeah, I kind of actually do like underdogs, because a lot of times it feels like they try harder and they're taken for granted. And there's a lot of good games on those things.
Yeah, and I think whenever you look at a system that didn't do that well, kind of the story behind it, the fact that, a group of people went in every day, put all this time and effort into it, and they put their whole life into making this system, and then it's kind of like failed dreams in a way, isn't it? You kind of know all the heart and soul went into it, but it just didn't work out. I think there's something kind of, it's tragic, obviously, but really interesting about those stories.
Indeed.
You mentioned earlier your arcade PCB boards and how hard they are to capture for and stuff. I love your arcade PCB episode and just find them fascinating. How did that come about? How did you start collecting them and stuff? Because that's not something I've ever looked into or considered myself. And always a little bit jealous when I see somebody even has one, let alone, a handful of them.
Right. I always wanted to, but I'd never really made a commitment. It's like, yeah, I think I'm going to get into this. So what happened was there was some fan, I forget his name right now, apologies if he happens to be listening, said, oh, I have these two spare games. And it was the soccer game and the little tile flipping game. He's like, I'll send them to you. It's like, okay, but I don't have a super gun, which is what you need to play arcade PCBs on your TV. And it's like, I told him I don't have one. It's like, well, too bad, I'm sending these to you anyway. It's like, well, okay, guess I need to get a super gun. And then I did. I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. So I started just scouring eBay and whatnot, and picking up a few cheap games that I'd actually want to play, and just kept going. I have 11 or 12 games now.
And obviously with nearly a decade worth of videos under your belt, I mean, kind of personally for you, what's kind of been your favorite video to work on your favorite console to cover?
Favorite console to cover, I think, might have been the Sharp X68000, just because it's so weird and bizarre and big. And it's lots of great games on that thing that are, they'll have better versions of what eventually came to the Sega CD or the Genesis or Mega Drive or whatever. And it's just interesting to play those games and all the modules you can attach to it, and just how much space that thing took up. The favorite videos I like to work on, probably the more creative ones, like the 16-bit FMV Madness, where we're actually the video of us is actually running off of a real Sega CD.
I remember that one.
And also like the Let's Make a YouTube show was really fun. And same with the Claymation episode, and also a very WTF episode, which is
I've got to ask about the video running on the Sega CD. I watched that and I didn't know whether it was some kind of trickery. You just kind of put that actually was real. How did you make that run on the Sega CD?
A gentleman by the name of Brian G. Van Buren was able to create some encoding software. And so I sent him the videos and he encoded it and sent me back a file that I could burn onto a disc and just play off of my CD or my Sega CD. And so I did, and he did that. And I captured the footage as I played off of my Sega CD. And it was just seeing yourself running on the video game system that you've had for so many years. It's a trip. Let me tell you. It's like, I never thought I'd be on my very own video game system.
Yeah, I bet watching that felt miles better than seeing yourself on YouTube. I bet it was much more of a buzz.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I believe I have that available for download at the GameSack.net site, and you could just run it on your Sega CD if it's NTSC compatible.
See, our Joe's in a metal band, and I've been trying to convince him to bring out his next single as like a Sega CD release, and I think that'd be, you get loads of attention.
I might have to try that now. So obviously in the show you joke a lot about being a big Sega fan. Do you have any like favorite third-party developers or any go-to developers?
I mean, it varies. There's a lot of them I like, Treasure, Capcom, Konami, although I don't feel Capcom or Konami did their best on the Genesis / Mega Drive. Technosoft, I really love everything they used to do back when they existed, just because it felt like they were very, very passionate about what they did. It's too bad they're no longer around. But those are the ones who mainly jump to mind.
One episode of yours I really, really enjoyed was the Tude episode you did, talking about like the Attitude Era and like the early 90s. I mean, just kind of remembering stuff like that. I'd kind of completely, obviously remember the games, but kind of the fact that was such an in thing at the time, kind of, I'd forgotten about it till I watched your video, kind of tapping into cultural aspects and stuff as well. That must have been a fun episode to work on, was it?
Oh, it really was. In fact, that's another one of my favorite episodes to make, because it was just being crazy for the sake of being crazy was just so much fun. It's always fun when it's just not the status quo episode. Not that those episodes aren't fun to make, but it's more fun to make episodes like that.
Even characters like Gex, I mean, he doesn't get enough love these days.
Right.
Are you planning on doing any more versus videos, or like maybe an Amiga versus Atari video?
Amiga versus Atari video would be crazy. I think I would have to cover the systems as a standalone episode first. But I remember looking, like, the only exposure to those two systems that I personally had back in the day was seeing the magazine advertisements, and they'd show the games like, here's the Atari ST, here's the Amiga version. I'm like, wow, they're really close to each other, and I always wanted to play them. To this day, I don't think I've ever played an Atari ST. I've got
an Atari ST. Yeah, it's kind of just an Amiga with crap sound, really.
Oh, that's sad. Yeah, the only time I finally was able to work with an Amiga, and when I went to my friend's art school, I was able to screw around with an Amiga there doing a graphic arts program, and then he eventually bought one along with a video toaster, and that was kind of amazing.
Because they were used quite heavily in video over there, weren't they?
Yeah. I mean, Video Toaster was, I think, what's his name? Tony Hawk was involved in helping create and market that back before he was a big skateboard guy. And he also edited videos for like the TurboGrafx marketing over here. It was amazing what that guy did. But yeah, Video Toaster was the thing that I just lusted after back in the day, and he got one.
I remember reading about them. It never came out over here. They didn't release a PAL version. But yeah, I'd still love to get one to this day. Yeah,
wow.
Just to play around with.
Yeah, and they had Lightwave 3D. It was like, oh, I wish I could have that.
Well, obviously, I mean, you still have Dave on the channel from time to time, but he was obviously your main co-host. What kind of happened with him leaving the show full time then, and how have you found it going alone since?
Well, he just felt that he works a full-time job, and he felt that it was taking away too much of his family time because he has a daughter that's growing up and stuff like that. And during the week, he'd have to record gameplay and write reviews, and then come down on the weekend and shoot the show and stuff like that. And he's like, well, I've been thinking about it for a while, and I could tell that he had, I could see it in his attitude over the previous few months that he just, he's had enough. And so he's like, well, I'd like to, spend more time with my family. I was like, well, you sure? Yeah. Okay. And so we did one more episode after that, and been going alone pretty much ever since. And it's a mixed blessing because, a lot of people miss Dave, of course, which is fine. I can understand that. But at the same time, it's a lot easier for me to do stuff and to decide stuff because I don't, when thinking up an episode topic, I don't have to contact Dave. So, hey, do you have enough games to cover for this topic? Do you want to do that or the other? And there's no back and forth there. I don't have to wait for him to do his reviews and stuff like that, or wait for him to come down to shoot video. I can just shoot it whenever I want. And then I can do a lot of bonus episodes, like reviewing recently I reviewed the Mega EverDrive Pro. And I just I threw that together. I got the review sample in, and then I reviewed it, or I wrote up and did my review and released it the first Sunday I could. And if Dave was still around and I wanted him in the episode, that review would take at least 2 more weeks because I'd have to get him in on it. It's really hard to do.
When you made the announcement that he was leaving, I think the channel is as strong as it ever has been. I think you put out some of your best stuff, on your own.
Thank you.
But was it were you nervous about what the reaction might be from the fans?
Yeah. I knew it would kind of be like, boo, Dave makes a show. Not everyone said that, just a few people. But I knew it would be kind of a mixed reaction from people. But I also knew that I had to keep going and do the same high caliber episodes we've done before in the same style. And because that was the only way it would make the show, let the show survive. And I think it's worked. I'll still get, the occasional person saying like, "Ooh, what happened to Dave?" Like, they haven't watched the show for over a year or whatever. But other than that, I think it's been going pretty good.
I was going to say, I didn't actually, it took me a while to notice because I actually missed the announcement, the episode where it was announced. And
yeah,
I didn't notice. And I remember I was just watching it one day because I work from home and I put my iPad on and, watch YouTube as I work. And I remember thinking, I was just like, where's he gone? But I never noticed any sort of drop in quality or anything like that. So I think it's fantastic that you carried on, putting out the same quality of videos and you didn't change your style or anything like that. I think that was probably the best thing you could do.
And, I always want to have them on, but even that is kind of a double-edged sword because the more I have them on, the more people start coming, in the comments saying, "Oh, bring him back, and stuff like that." It's like, I do want to have them on.
That's
at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, I don't know.
Yeah, kind of hinted at then how long it takes to make an episode. What's kind of the average time production starts from, thinking of the idea to releasing it on YouTube? How long is it for the typical episode?
Well, I make the episodes way, way in advance, like a couple of months before you see them on YouTube. I'm making the episode, usually, unless it's like a product review where I try to get it out as soon as I can. So I think of whatever the idea is, and depending on what it is, it'll take me a few days to record all the gameplay and write the review. And then my least favorite part is recording the voiceover and then editing that voiceover into something that flows, and then editing the episode, and then recording the talking head segments, as I call them. And then after that, I shoot the end skit. So that it can usually take about a week and a half to 2 weeks per episode, depending on how complex it is. For like the system episodes where I cover a console or a platform, those take a lot longer because I have to shoot an overview, which has like complex video things that I don't normally do. So those can take like 2.5 to 3 weeks sometimes.
I love the fact that you're so organized with it as well. I think if we record an episode a week in advance, we think we're doing well.
Yeah,
I was going to say this is for next Friday, and we think we're ahead of the curve.
Well, it's good to have stuff, out there so that you can release while you're still working on other stuff. It makes things a lot less stressful. I couldn't even imagine if I'm just making the episode now that I'm going to release next week, and I'm barely done with it.
That's all over.
And audio is a lot easier to edit than video.
Yeah, that's true.
I bet.
So you're closing in on 250,000 subscribers on YouTube, and which is fantastic. And you touched on there that Dave had a full-time job and stuff. Do you have a regular 9 till 5, or is GameSack your full-time job now?
GameSack occupies most of my time. I still do some freelance video editing that is non-GameSack though. Basically, my freelance job is just I'll take what I can get sometimes if I have the time. So GameSack has the priority. I don't necessarily need to do the freelance editing to survive, but I like to sometimes. I like to because a friend of mine owns a company who does a lot of that, and I'll help him out.
Well, you show off, obviously, some incredible hardware and software in your videos. Tell us a bit about your collection then. I mean, how's that coming along and how do you kind of keep it all? Do you have like a storage area that you keep it in? And how big is your collection?
For the game collection, well, it's pretty much what you see on the videos behind me, like when I'm doing the end skits, those crooked bookshelves of 8 and 16-bit games. That's pretty much it for those. Upstairs, I have my more modern games. Oh, also in my the room where I have the green screen, which I record my voiceovers and stuff in, I have more retro games. Those are like 32-bit, like PlayStation, Xbox, and Xbox 360 and stuff like that, GameCube, what have you. So they're kind of scattered all out throughout the house, but fortunately the climate here is pretty mild, so nothing's going to get too environmentally damaged where they are.
Because I moved house about a year and a half ago thinking that I had a lot more room, and then I think I've filled every area of this room I'm in now with a... When the room gets bigger, you just think I'll buy more stuff. I don't feel the same.
Right. Yeah, it's hard.
So
I always need another bookshelf.
Go ahead, Jeff. I was going to say I'm looking at another bookshelf right now, but I've got a little girl on the way, and I think I'm going to lose the games room in the next couple of years, so I'm holding off buying another shelf at the moment. But is there any, with you being a Sega fanboy, is there any kind of like Nintendo versions of games you were jealous of but you kind of wish came out on the Sega?
Oh, lots. I mean, because like I said towards the start of the show, I made a friend a videotape of the Sega games. Well, he made me videotapes of the NES games that he had. So I was just like, oh, Blaster Master, that's awesome. Castlevania, oh man, Mega Man 2, that's awesome. I want that on Sega. And yeah, those games are just incredibly cool. But like there's even some like Super Nintendo versions that I think are better than the Genesis versions for sure, like Sunset Riders. I much prefer on the Super Nintendo. And there's a lot of games like that actually. So it's not like I think Nintendo is bad in any way, shape, or form, because they're not. It's just I have a little soft spot for Sega.
Yeah, because we were talking on our podcast last week, there's like a new release of Street Fighter 2 for the Genesis. Like a fan has kind of upgraded it to be kind of as good as the arcade version, and we were talking on
that.
And it looks impressive. And we were talking last week about the fact that to me that was always like a Super Nintendo game. But our Joe, he was saying that you grew up playing it on the Genesis, so to him that was like the proper version. But it seemed like back then there was quite a big difference in the platforms that you don't really get today.
Really, I mean, the Street Fighter on the Super Nintendo in a lot of ways, just blew away the Genesis versions. And what I think Pyron did with that and what others have done with their Street Fighter 2 hacks, because there's a lot, they just made the game so much better to play on the Genesis. And I much prefer the Genesis 6-button controller. And so with the color hacks and the sound hacks, which make the voices sound much more tolerable than they were, it's definitely a much more enjoyable experience. I just wish we could have had that experience back when the games originally came out. And I think if we could have, a lot of people wouldn't have crapped on Sega as much as they did.
I was always a massive Sega fanboy, and I was just going to say maybe it was just naivety for me when I was a lot younger, but I think I'm going to jump on what you just said there and just say I much preferred the 6-button controller as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So I see you've been streaming recently. Is that something you want to get into more?
Not really. I mean, it's kind of a pain to set up for me, just because I'm more set up for content. Well, I don't know if I'd call it content creation because that's not fair to streamers. I would call it, I don't know what I would call what I do versus streaming, but I'm more set up for that. And streaming, I have to put, it's really hard because I have to set up some sort of monitor so I can view the chat, and I have to move the camera in a different place. And it's honestly kind of stressful. I don't know how people deal with it.
In terms of the content that you cover, I mean, do you kind of have like a cutoff point for retro? What you kind of consider retro, like a date maybe?
Not really. I mean, I haven't really covered much of say the Atari eras, the stuff before the NES, mainly because, well, two reasons. I didn't play it that much. I played it a little, and also I don't know how interested people would be to see it. I know some people would be really interested, and I understand that, but I don't know how many of those people there are, and I don't know how much interest I could feign in games that are so incredibly simple that, once you've seen one screen, you've seen the game. As far as going forward, I don't know where you'd say, I would say PlayStation 2 is definitely retro. PlayStation 3, I don't think it's retro yet. But I'm still covering it. I would still cover games on PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4. I don't care. If it's a good game, I'll cover it. If it fits the theme of whatever I'm talking about in that episode. To me, a video game's a video game, just as long as it's good.
Yeah.
I think, when they're talking about classic cars, it's generally like 20 years, isn't it? Which I think for me, in terms of describing something as retro, that kind of 20-year mark kind of works for me, I think.
No, I totally agree. I think, like you say, if it's a good game and it's worth covering, then absolutely cover it. We didn't used to kind of talk about the early 2000s when we first started the podcast, but it's really creeping its way in now. So we are talking more about Xbox and PS2 and stuff like that. So
and Dreamcast.
Yeah, no, I love the Dreamcast. We're all three of us. We've not got Ravi on right now, but we're all massive fans of the Dreamcast.
Awesome.
I mean, did you look at the Dreamcast? Obviously, as a Sega fan, I mean, that must have been a bit bittersweet, like this amazing console coming out, and then the fact that it kind of ended their, hardware division.
Oh yeah, that was all sorts of awful. I mean, that was just like, the Dreamcast was just crazy because when it launched, at least when it launched over here, it was an amazing success. I mean, I went to the midnight launch of that thing, and there was a line that went through the mall and out the mall to get into the store to buy one. And I don't know how they had enough, but they did. And even though you reserved one in advance, which I did, so they must have gotten a ton in. And that was the biggest launch for video games ever, to my knowledge. And games would come out, and lots of good games, and they kept coming and coming. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, the Dreamcast isn't, I don't know exactly what how they announced it, but they were just saying, yeah, we're just not going to do it anymore. We're going to get out of the console business. And it was just like a kick in the enthusiasm. It's just like, well, I don't know how enthused about video games I can be. I mean, I still remained enthusiastic about video games, but there was a time there where it's like nothing's happening in the video game land. And it took a while before I really got into the Xbox, and I really like that system. But there was a while there where it was just like I wasn't very excited about games.
It was sad to see Sega exit the hardware division because I mean, I looked at that system then and I thought it was a great console. And I know today, pretty much everyone we talk to, every retro gaming fan I know, thinks the Dreamcast is like one of their top 5 systems of all time. It kind of feels a bit like, gamers didn't appreciate what they had at the time. I kind of felt like a lot of people I knew were always like they knew the PS2 was coming up and it's going to have a DVD drive, so they kind of overlooked the Dreamcast.
Right, exactly. And nowadays, people just look back on the Dreamcast for the games. They don't care if it has a DVD drive or not. No one's going to want to play their DVDs in their Dreamcast or even their PS2. So that's not even a point of contention anymore. It's just like you look at the games and only the games. And when you do that, the Dreamcast is, it's pretty nice.
It's interesting you mentioned about the launch of the Dreamcast as well, because I was still at school when the Dreamcast came out. But I totally agree. Here in the UK, it was such a huge marketing campaign about it. There was adverts on TV, all over the magazines, and just, mainstream TV, always about how it was online and everything. So, yeah, a real shame to see it flop like that. Well, it flopped in the UK anyway.
Yeah, it was really ahead of its time for what it was trying to do, I think.
Yeah.
What do you think of kind of Sega's recent announcements? I mean, obviously they've kind of been looking at their legacy. You know, we've had the Astro City Mini announcement recently, the Game Gear Mini that I thought was quite a curious announcement. We've also had the cloud gaming they're doing too. What do you kind of think of Sega's direction at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, there's Sega. There's I'm glad they're not dead, I guess. The Game Gear Mini announcement was like, okay, but the Astro City thing, I'm actually thinking that's kind of cool because it's their actual arcade games. Now, I don't think they've announced every game that's going to be in on that, but I'm looking forward to it. I mean, I hope they bring it out in places other than Japan, but I'm going to pre-order it from Japan anyway, just in case. But I think that's really cool that they're doing that. I just hope the emulation is good.
It does kind of feel like Sega are kind of taking their past a bit more seriously now and like kind of giving the fans a bit of what they want at least.
Yeah, you know what I want though? I want a real Phantasy Star game, not a Phantasy Star Online. I want a real Phantasy Star that's an actual RPG.
Yeah, there's so much they could do. They've got so many great IPs they just sit on that surely they've got to kind of, whether we just need to keep nagging them or what, I don't know, but it feels like there's a lot there that they could be doing.
Yeah, I think they know it, but they can only do so much at a time. So we'll see, I guess.
Well, Joe, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I mean, what's kind of coming up on the channel and what videos can we look forward to over the next few weeks?
So that means the next episode I will have out should be the PlayStation Portable. So that was fun to make. No, is it the PlayStation Port? I think it is. I got to check my calendar. So I have so much content already made. Yep, Sony PSP coming out on August 2nd.
Fantastic. Well, I'm sure that everyone that's listening to our show probably watches GameSack anyway, but we will, of course, put a link in the show notes to the channel for the like one or two guys that maybe haven't. But keep up the incredible work on the channel, and thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Oh, it's been great being a guest on the show.